I mean, just because you put the ending logy after something you believe in, it does not automatically become science. It can become a church, but it won't become science. See what I did there? The brain is a fascinating organ that is, even nowadays, not as understood as others because it's much more complicated and people tend to die if you try to take a peek into it, so you can't really see its functions. Well, you couldn't until a lot of neuroimaging techniques arise, which are super cool. In the 19th century, the science around brains, or else neuroscience, was getting more and more popular because, let's be real, it is crazy what our brains can do. So people, of course, are still trying to figure out everything about it. Scientists started seeing the functional connections of the entire body to the brain. They could see that by looking at people who had endured brain injuries, for example, and who, even though they lost certain abilities, were still able to do other stuff. Or by experimental ablation, which is basically the destruction of parts of the brain, done usually on animals, to test what happens to the abilities of the test subject. If you, for example, destroy an area of the brain which is important for vocalization, your animal would have all the other abilities it had before, but would not be able to vocalize anymore, even though physiologically nothing in its vocalization process was altered, so no vocal cords were damaged, for example. These kinds of observations led to the belief that brains are separated into specific sections which have specific connections to the rest of the body and its abilities, which is not completely false, but well, today we know that there are specialized areas in the brain with specific functions, but that they also are never isolated, but rather a nodal point connecting others, highly flexible and intertwined areas which are specific to very small sections of an ability. Naturally, with neuroscience becoming more and more fascinating and popular, a lot of junk was also said about brains. You see, the more popular a scientific field grows, the more misinformation can be easily spread with science as a basis. Phrenology is such an example of pseudoscience, a field of study that claimed that our personality could be read off of our skull, basically. Franz Josef Gall was probably the one starting it all, or at least spreading it very effectively, and he believed that not only the apparent abilities of the body, like hearing, seeing, talking, were controlled by specific brain regions, but also character traits, like religiousness or curiosity. This is not so horrible in itself if they didn't take it to another level. Phrenologists had the misconception that the brain was divided into many distinct organs, which were controlling each a specific personality trait, and that, like with muscles, for example, the more of one trait you had, the bigger this part of the brain was, and that the skull was adjusting itself to the brain inside. This means that there suddenly was a very specific brain form, or skull form, that was considered to be the right one. The one which a person who was God-fearing enough and had a social and society-conform personality out of an educated socioeconomic bubble had. If you had a bump on your skull somewhere, it meant that you are mean or deceiving, or if on the other side you were loving and compassionate. So as a phrenologist, you could inspect someone's skull and determine their personality. A practicing phrenologist could even be consulted to foretell an only 6-year-old kid's talents and abilities, which supposedly also help with the choice of occupation the parents would then nudge their kid into. I guess you can imagine how detrimental these notions would be for a diverse society. In America, a guy called Morton wrote a best-selling book which explained how Caucasians are a superior race because they have the correct skull shape, and that justified discrimination and even slavery. Racism and discrimination of minorities just got even easier because they were once again scientifically proven. Mind you, there is no notion of serious neuroscientists at the time actually believing this shit, but exactly as it is happening right now, scientists are only taken seriously from the public if there is not a more interesting and idiotic theory around to prove them wrong. All this spreading of misinformation and wrong usage of the word science is possible because of the personal validation effect. The cognitive bias where people believe things as being true if it's personally meaningful to them. It's a little like having your future foretold at a fair, or You guessed it, zodiac signs. I do find it entertaining reading my predictions for the year or something, but I'm absolutely aware of the fact that these predictions have nothing to do with real science. Astrology is here to tell you that if you are born on the 22nd of September, then you are a Virgo and thus an analytical thinker. But if you were born on the 23rd, you are an imaginative and romantic Libra. Do you feel like this makes any scientific sense? Didn't think so. So phrenology is basically foreseeing your future and your personality traits, just like horoscopes, but with skulls instead of stars. And to set phrenology into an understandable, conceivable 21st century setting, how would you feel if all the people being born on the zodiac sign of, I don't know, Cancer for example, were not taking on for jobs just because of their birth date? How would you feel if CEOs would only be people born as a Virgo, or if you could get less wages just because, I don't know, you don't have a penis? Oh, this is still happening, isn't it? Either way, phrenology was a very harmful pseudoscience, which has one positive aspect nowadays though. It has taught us how science can be used to push discriminating and detrimental ideas onto society, if put in context of a personal agenda. Biologism is used by every single extremist who wants to make himself feel better by making the color of his hair, his penis, or his lack of melanin the superior trait, and by conducting methodologically good, clear, and conservative peer-reviewed science, we are trying to put an end to these pseudosciences, which are so bad for our society.